Hello! I'm here. In a forest. Not really. How is everyone? We're gonna jump straight into the game first. I just wanted to show off this little background. Yeah. Nice stream start screen, never seen it before. It's always been there, but I guess you haven't been at the beginning before. Anyway, hi. I'm not feeling the greatest, so I was gonna do more with this stream. But that's okay. We'll have a good hour together. And then I will go rest, and that'll be fun. We'll still have fun. Hi, Jack fan. How are you? Of course, happy Halloween. I moved my camera, so hopefully I look more like, I'm looking at you. Whether that's a good thing or not, you can let me know. But, yeah. So I am now looking at you. Anyway, let's get started. Just jump over. We're gonna go ahead and get started. That was just a test. I didn't play. Don't worry. Dagon is a faithful interactive adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's work focused on story and atmosphere. You will not find difficult choices, action sequences, or inventory management here, and movement is limited to progressing through locations along with the plot. So it is very much just an interactive story.
I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more.
Alright, so just look around. You'll encounter interactive elements. Some of them will allow you to continue your journey. Others reveal interesting facts about the original. Hey Glenn, we just started. You're on time. About the original short story, its historical background, and the author. Some of the trivia is hidden. In order to find these secrets, focus your eyes and look for the Elder Sign. You can also access all the found facts later. They will be available. It's a very simple point and click.
Penniless, and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below.
Here today, Dagon tomorrow.
Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate.
Okay, so we already know the main character is taking pain med.
When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death.
I'm guessing they went through something traumatic.
It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German Sea Raider.
I'm playing with the mouse, but my controller's still hooked up, so it just made the whole desk shake.
The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation. So that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners.
Naval prisoners? What's this? Oh, we found something. The Huns were Central Asian nomads who established a dominion in Europe and invaded the Roman Empire in the 5th century AD, so it's a little history lesson. They were known as brutal, deadly warriors and masters of quick raids who also developed powerful composite bows, lassos, and early siege weapons. During World War I, the British used the word Hun as synonym for Germans. Oh, really? Didn't know that. However, the term originated when the German Emperor Wilhelm II gave a speech to his troops on the 27th of July, 1900, before they embarked to China. Hey, Doctor! Should you encounter the enemy, he will be defeated. No quarter will be given. Prisoners will not be taken. Whoever falls into your hands is forfeited. Just as 1,000 years ago, the Huns under their king Attila made a name for themselves, one that even today makes them seem mighty in history and legend. May the name German be affirmed by you in such a way in China that no Chinese will ever again dare to look cross-eyed at a German. The refusal to take prisoners was a clear breach of the laws and customs of war adopted during the First Hague Convention of 1899. Okay. Is that just a background of I guess, the time of this story?
So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken,
All right,
I
Glenn.
managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time.
Alright, so we have provisions. I'm not seeing another story point, so yeah, let's just go on. That's gonna
When
freak
I
me out.
finally
Maybe I
found
should
myself
play on.
adrift and free, I had but little idea of my
Controller.
surroundings.
Let's do that. At least it will vibrate in my hands.
Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude, I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight.
Alright, so we're out on the water. Oh, there.
The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land.
Okay, so he's out as a prisoner trying to escape. I'm gonna have some
But
water.
neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous.
Oh. So this is a terrible nightmare? Okay.
When at last I awoke, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished.
This is what happens if you eat cheese before bed. It's what it feels like in your stomach if you can't digest something.
For there was in the air, and in the rotting soil, a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish, and of other, less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity.
Silence can be scary, you know.
There was nothing
Dark
within hearing,
silence.
and nothing in sight, save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet.
Okay, what do we check? We check the boat. Okay.
As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position.
Weird delirious, maybe?
Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface,
of course.
exposing regions for which
logical.
innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, straining my ears as I might. Nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things.
Yeah, this is a pretty bad nightmare. Okay, I don't see any points, so we just go on.
For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for traveling purposes in a short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland
so we
journey
do
in
have
search
food
of
and
the
water.
vanished sea and possible rescue.
Not sure how much food and water. I guess let's try and get to rescue.
On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal. All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert.
Alright, let's go forward. Skeleton? Alright.
That night, I encamped, and on the following day still travelled toward the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it. By the fourth evening, I attained the base of the
found a
mound,
mountain.
which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance. An intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain,
I like the narrator's voice.
I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again. And in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day.
Hold on. Okay, there we go.
Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence.
Guess we're at night now. Let's pick up our pack.
I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me. But I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost.
Curious thing. I've always been curious about Paradise Lost just because I like the way it sounds, but I know nothing about it.
And of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined. Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of only a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual. Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps, where no light had yet penetrated. All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me. an object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon.
Okay.
That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself.
Curious.
But I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express. For despite its enormous magnitude, and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith, whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely.
Alright. Well, there's not much to examine. Let's just go forward.
The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope.
Getting a short tea break.
Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the Cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything I'd ever seen in books, consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks.
This actually makes a lot
whales,
of
and
sense
the like.
considering Lovecraft, you know, is associated with Cthulhu.
Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound.
I think he was into writing about monsters from the deep because, you know, there's so much unknown about the ocean that I guess he was just fascinated. Dagon contains many themes and storytelling methods that Lovecraft developed in later works, such as telling the story through carvings, journals, and character notes, islands emerging from the ocean, which is the Call of Cthulhu I just talked about, or fictional beings and deities based on real events and mythologies. It's also considered the origin of the popular Cthulhu mythos. Some of Lovecraft's other stories also conclude in a manner similar to Dagon, but let's skip the details, not spoil, which is appreciated. Yeah, there's a lot of sea monster stuff.
Plainly visible across the intervening water on account of their enormous size were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a Doré. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto,
They're like squid people.
or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer. They were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seem to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background. For one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size.
Lovecraft invented Splatoon. Yeah, squid people, except that they're not cute. Like squid kids. Hey Sposhi, happy Halloween!
But in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe. Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born.
How are you, Sposhi?
Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then, suddenly, I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters.
Yeah, I see it.
Fiend-like and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds.
Just got done picking up some groceries for making Halloween brownies. Oh, that sounds fun.
I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little. I believe I sang a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing.
Okay, so he's slowly going mad. This is descent into madness.
I have indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard pearls of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest notes. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing.
Gonna rough few. Oh, you're talking about Sposhi. Sorry.
Nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe.
Oh, got another one. Lovecraft was a prominent figure in the world of amateur journalism. In 1915, he started publishing his own journal called The Conservative, which included political and social commentary, poetry, short stories, and literary criticisms written by him and other authors. Howard was a skilled wordsmith, but he also took criticisms to heart, which resulted in his decision to step away from writing poetry and concentrate on weird fiction for the first time since his teenage years. Dagon, published in 1919, is one of the short stories written during that period. In this example excerpt, the master of horror fiction explains his attitude towards warfare and the idea of world peace, why any sane human being can believe in the possibility of universal peace is more than the conservative can fathom, should the entire civilized world agree simultaneously to disarm. One or more nations would undoubtedly retain secret armaments and at the proper time take advantage of their more altruistic and less astute contemporaries in a wild career of conquest against unarmed victims. No country is or ever can be above warfare until the basic impulses of the human animal shall have miraculously changed. That's his viewpoint. That got a little political, but we're not getting political here. I'm just reading. Lovecraft was probably very racist. Well, I mean, a lot of people from that time were. Just how it was.
Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god.
So Dagon is a fish god. He's the main deity. Ancient god of fertility and crops. Patron saint of war conquests. He also appeared as the judge of the dead and an underworld prison warder. Okay, so he escaped a prison of a sort. So then he saw Dagon because he was an underworld prison warder, I'm guessing. Alright, so is that it? That wasn't that scary. Well, anyway, I just got this for free. It was just given out for free with the Halloween sale. So I thought, why not?
But soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries.
Oh, Necronomicon. August Derleth was an American writer and anthologist. He also befriended Lovecraft and published many of his works through his company Arkham House. Although he greatly contributed to the popularization of the author's works after his death, he's surrounded by numerous controversies. Good versus evil, the Cthulhu mythos. Okay. I gotta look over here. Alright. Not sure what we're looking at here. It pointed us to this direction.
It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient surcease, on me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men. Often, I ask myself if it could not all have been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever, as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man-of-war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply.
So basically, he was in the war, he was captured, he escaped, he went mad.
I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering.
But he can't get the images out of his head.
Worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down into their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when the land shall sink, and the dark ocean shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium.
How did we get to New York?
The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. God, that hand! The window! The window!
Alright, alright. That's a lovely ending. Okay, well, that was that. Nobody in New York knows how they got to New York. Alright, well, now we get to switch to something completely different where I get to read Edgar Allan Poe. Specifically, I picked out my favorite story of his. That's short enough to read anyway. And I actually have a little story to go with the story that I will talk about after I read it. So yeah, let's do that. That'll be fun. A little bit of a literary Halloween. So yes, he's very gone. Let's just switch screens. I'm not sure how to get an atmospheric audio going that will be captured on Just Chatting. Let's see. I don't know. So I might not have any atmospheric music. But we will still do this. Wish you could have come in at the beginning of the story. It's alright, but it was very basic, I feel like. It wasn't, like, that impressive, in my opinion. But anyway, I have this big Edgar Allan Poe book, because I have, like, a whole collection. And I have bookmarked my page, so I'm at the story now, and I am going to be reading The Black Cat. I might be looking down while I read, but I'm still here, and I'm still watching chat. If you have any comments or say anything, I will respond at the end of a paragraph probably, but I will respond. Just drinking a little bit of tea first. So, who has Halloween plans, or are you just chilling? I'm gonna be watching 2 Disney short specials. I'm gonna do the Lego Star Wars Scary Tales, or whatever it's called, and Muppets Haunted Mansion, and that's about it. Then I'll probably just play. But anyway, are we ready? We're going to start The Black Cat. And just in time. For the most... just waiting to see if any kids come by. Okay, cool. I will start now. For the most wild yet most homely narrative which I am about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Mad indeed would I be to expect it in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet mad am I not, and very surely do I not dream. But tomorrow I die, and today I would unburthen my soul. My immediate purpose is to place before the world plainly, succinctly, and without comment a series of mere household events. In their consequences these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. Yet I will not attempt to expound them. To me they have presented little but horror. To many they will seem less terrible than Baroque's. Hereafter, perhaps, some intellect may be found which will reduce my phantasm to the commonplace, some intellect more calm, more logical, and far less excitable than my own, which will perceive in the circumstances I detail with awe nothing more than an ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects. From my infancy I was noted for the docility and humanity of my disposition. My tenderness of heart was even so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. I was especially fond of animals, and was indulged by my parents with a great variety of pets. With these I spent most of my time, and never was so happy as when feeding and caressing them. This peculiarity of character grew with my growth, and in my manhood I derived from it one of my principal sources of pleasure. This is reading so far pretty biographical, because Edgar Allan Poe really did love animals. To those who have cherished an affection for a faithful and sagacious dog, I need hardly be at the trouble of explaining the nature of the intensity of the gratification thus derivable. There is something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute, which goes directly to the heart of him who has had frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity of mere man. I married early, and was happy to find in my wife a disposition not uncongenial with my own. Observing my partiality for domestic pets, she lost no opportunity of procuring those of the most agreeable kind. We had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. Wow. That's certainly a lot of different pets. I'm not sure why my model is acting a little messed up. Let's fix that. Okay. That was a lot of pets. They had a small monkey. Okay. This latter was a remarkably large, latter being the cat, a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black and sagacious to an astonishing degree. In speaking of his intelligence, my wife, who at heart was not a little tinctured with superstition, made frequent allusion to the ancient popular notion which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. Not that she was even serious upon this point, and I mention the matter at all for no better reason than that it happens just now to be remembered. Pluto, this was the cat's name, was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him, and he attended me wherever I went about the house. It was even with difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. Our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend intemperance, had, I blush to confess it, experienced a radical alteration for the worse. I grew day by day more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. At length I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating him, as I made no scruple of maltreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog when by accident or through affection they came in my way. But my disease grew upon me, for what disease is like alcohol? And at length even Pluto, who was now becoming old and consequently somewhat peevish, even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper. One night, returning home, much intoxicated from one of my haunts about town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him when in his fright at my violence he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed at once to take its flight from my body, and a more than fiendish maleficence, gin nurture, thrilled every fibre of my frame. I took from my waistcoat pocket a penknife, opened it, grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut one of its eyes from the socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder, while I pen the damnable atrocity. When reason returned with the morning, when I had slept off the fumes of the night's debauch, I experienced a sentiment half of horror, half of remorse for the crime of which I had been guilty, but it was at best a feeble and equivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched. I again plunged into excess, and soon drowned in wine all memory of the deed. Just taking a little breather. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of the lost eye presented, it is true, a frightful appearance, but he had no longer appeared to suffer any pain. He went about the house as usual, but, as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach. I had so much of my old heart left as to be at first grieved by this evident dislike on the part of a creature which had once so loved me. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and then came, as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow, the spirit of perverseness. Of this spirit philosophy takes no account, yet I am not more sure that my soul lives than I am that perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart, one of the indivisible primary faculties, or sentiments which give direction to the character of man. Who has not 100 times found himself committing a vile or silly action for no other reason than because he knows he should not? Have we not a perpetual inclination in the teeth of our best judgment to violate that which is a law, merely because we understand it to be such? This spirit of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable longing of perverseness, Sorry, I lost my line. It was this unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself, to offer violence in its own nature, to do wrong for the wrong's sake only, that urged me to continue and finally to consummate the injury I had inflicted upon the unoffending brute. One morning in cold blood I slipped a noose around its neck and hung it to the limb of a tree, hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes, and with the bitterest remorse of my heart, Hung it because I knew that it had loved me, and because I felt it had given me no reason of offense. Hung it because I knew that in doing so I was committing a sin, a deadly sin that would so jeopardize my immortal soul as to place it, if such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. On the night of the day on which this cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. The curtains of my bed were in flames. The whole house was blazing. It was with great difficulty that my wife, a servant, and myself were made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself thenceforward to despair. I'm gonna take a short break so I can drink. I feel like I'm going a little fast, but alright. We got some water, it's okay. I am above the weakness of seeking to establish a sequence of cause and effect between the disaster and the atrocity, but I am detailing a chain of facts and wish not to leave even a possible link imperfect. On the day succeeding the fire, I visited the ruins. The walls, with one exception, had fallen in. This exception was found in a compartment wall, not very thick, which stood about the middle of the house, and against which had rested the head of my bed. The plastering had here, in great measure, resisted the action of the fire. Thanks for that. Let me just finish this paragraph. A fact which I attributed to its having been recently spread. About this wall a dense crowd were collected, and many persons seemed to be examining a particular portion of it with very minute and eager attention. The words strange, singular, and other similar expressions excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as if graven in bas-relief upon the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. The impression was given with an accuracy truly marvelous. There was a rope about the animal's neck. I will take that stretch. I think I got the wrong story, but that's okay. We're already started. This might be the wrong story, though. It's alright. It's been a while, so I didn't really remember which one. This could still be the right story. It's been a while. We'll get through it, and we'll see. I remember the end. Just gonna check. Okay, perhaps it is the right story. Yeah. Alright, let's continue. When I first beheld this apparition, for I could scarcely regard it as less, my wonder and my terror were extreme, but at length reflection came to my aid. The cat, I remembered, had been hung in a garden adjacent to the house. Upon the alarm of fire, this garden had been immediately filled by the crowd, by some one of whom the animal must have been cut from the tree and thrown through an open window into my chamber. This had probably been done with the view of arousing me from sleep. The falling of other walls had comprised the victim of my cruelty into the substance of the freshly spread plaster. the line of which, with the flames and the ammonia from the carcass, had then accomplished the portraiture as I saw it. Although I thus readily accounted to my reason, if not altogether to my conscience, for the startling fact that just detailed, it did not the less fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy. For months I could not get rid of the phantasm of the cat, and during this period there came back into my spirit a half-sentiment that seemed but was not remorse. I went so far as to regret the loss of the animal, and to look about me among the vile haunts which I now habitually frequented for another pet of the same species and of somewhat similar appearance with which to supply its place. So he's looking for a replacement cat. One night, as I sat, half stupefied in a den of more than infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black object reposing upon the head of one of the immense hogsheads of gin or of rum, which constituted the chief furniture of the apartment. I had been looking steadily at the top of this hogshead for some minutes, and what now caused me surprise was the fact that I had not sooner perceived the object thereupon. I approached it and touched it with my hand. It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large as Pluto. Fully as large as Pluto, and closely resembling him in every respect but one. Pluto had not a white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite splotch of white, covering nearly the whole region of the breast. Upon my touching him, he immediately arose, purred loudly, rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice. This, then, was the very creature of which I was in search. I at once offered to purchase it of the landlord, but this person made no claim to it, knew nothing of it, had never seen it before. I continued my caresses, and when I prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. I permitted it to do so, occasionally stooping and patting it as I proceeded. When it reached the house, it domesticated itself at once, and became immediately a great favorite with my wife. For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. This was just the reverse of what I had anticipated, but I knew not how or why it was. Its evident fondness for myself rather disgusted and annoyed. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance arose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature, a certain sense of shame, and the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty preventing me from physically abusing it. I did not, for some weeks, strike or otherwise violently ill-use it, but gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with unutterable loathing, and to flee silently from its odious presence, as from the breath of a pestilence. What added, no doubt, to my hatred of the beast was the discovery on the morning after I brought it home, that, like Pluto, it also had been deprived of one of its eyes. This circumstance, however, only endeared it to my wife, who, as I have already said, possessed a high degree that humanity of feeling which had once been my distinguishing trait and the source of many of my simplest and purest pleasures. With my aversion to this cat, however, its partiality for myself seemed to increase. It followed my footsteps with a pertinacity which it would be difficult to make the reader comprehend. Whenever I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair or spring upon my knees, covering me with its loathsome caresses. If I arose to walk, it would get between my feet and thus nearly throw me down, or fastening its large and sharp claws in my dress, clamber in this manner to my breast. At such times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I was yet withheld from doing so, partly by a memory of my former crime, but chiefly, let me confess it at once, by absolute dread of the beast. This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at a loss how otherwise to define it. I am almost ashamed to own, yes, even in this felon's cell, I am almost ashamed to own, that the terror and horror with which the animal inspired me had been heightened by one of the merest chimeras it would be possible to conceive. My wife had called my attention more than once to the character of the mark of the white hair, of which I had spoken, and which constituted the sole visible difference between the strange beast and the one I had destroyed. The reader will remember that this mark, although large, had been originally very indefinite, but by slow degrees nearly imperceptible, and which for a long time my reason struggled to reject as fanciful, it had, at length, assumed a rigorous distinctness of outline. It was now the representation of an object that I shudder to name, and for this, above all, I loathed and dreaded, and would have rid myself of the monster had I dared. It was now, I say, the image of a hideous or a ghastly thing. Of the gallows, oh, mournful and terrible engine of horror and of crime, of agony and of death. They could rename this Man Doesn't Vibe with Cat. It's dramatic about it. Yeah, that's true. Okay, this is probably a good time to grab some water. We're almost done. And now I was indeed wretched beyond the wretchedness of mere humanity, and a brute beast whose fellow I had contemptuously destroyed, a brute beast to work out for me, a man fashioned in the image of the high God, so much of insufferable woe. Alas, neither by day nor by night I knew I the blessing of rest any more. During the former, the creature left me no moment alone, and in the latter I started hourly from dreams of unutterable fear to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, its vast weight, an incarnate nightmare that I had no power to shake off, incumbent eternally upon my heart. Cat just wants to hang out, clearly. Beneath the pressure of torments such as these, the feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates, the darkest and most evil of thoughts. The moodiness of my usual temper increased to hatred of all things and of all mankind. Very dramatic. Well, from the sudden, frequent, and ungovernable outbursts of a fury to which I now blindly abandoned myself, my uncomplaining wife, alas, was the most usual and the most patient of sufferers. One day she accompanied me upon some household errand into the cellar of the old building which our poverty compelled us to inhabit. The cat followed me down the steep stairs, and nearly throwing me headlong, exasperated me to madness. Uplifting an axe, and forgetting in my wrath the childish dread which had which had hitherto stayed my hand, I aimed a blow at the animal, which of course would have proven instantly fatal had it descended as I wished. But this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife. Goaded by the interference into a rage more than demoniacal, I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. Wow. That's sad. Hey, Pokefan, welcome. Thank you for the follow. And hi, Fuzz. Thank you for the raid. Yes, reading time. Getting through this story. The Black Cat, in which the protagonist is lamenting about how much he hates the cat that he once loved. So he killed that cat, and he got a replacement cat who continues to haunt him. And in trying to kill that cat, in a fit of rage, he just accidentally killed his wife. So, that happened. She fell dead upon the spot without a groan. The hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthright, and with entire deliberation, to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house, either by day or by night, without the risk of being observed by the neighbors. Many projects entered my mind. At one period I thought of cutting the corpse into minute fragments and destroying them by fire. At another I resolved to dig a grave for it in the floor of the cellar. Again I deliberated about casting it in the well in the yard, about packing it in a box as if to merchandise with the usual arrangements, and so getting a porter to take it from my house. Finally, I hit upon what I considered a far better expedient from either of these. I determined to wall it up in the cellar. This is the correct story. Okay, good. As the monks of the Middle Ages are recorded to have walled up their victims. I need to take a little break. But yes, this is the correct story. It does have to do with the cellar, and that's what I have an additional story to tell about, like an actual real life story. For a purpose such as this, the cellar was well adapted. Its walls were loosely constructed and had lately been plastered throughout with a rough plaster, which the dampness of the atmosphere had prevented from hardening. Moreover, in one of the walls was a projection, caused by a false chimney or fireplace that had been filled up and made to resemble the red of the cellar. I made no doubt that I could readily displace the bricks at this point, insert the corpse, and wall the whole thing up as before, so that no eye could detect anything suspicious. Okay, I need a little bit more of a break because I'm getting out of breath. Anyway, how was your stream? That's a good time to ask that. We have just over a page left. You played Pokemon again, didn't you? Oh, and thank you for the stretch. I should do that. It was scuffed. Oh no. A 3-hour play session into 6.5. Wow. It's more than double. We progressed and took no losses. Yay! That's good to hear. Alright. So he just inserted the corpse, and in this calculation I was not deceived. By means of a crowbar I easily dislodged the bricks, and having carefully deposited the body against the inner wall, I propped it in that position, while with little trouble I relaid the whole structure as it originally stood. Having procured mortar, sand, and hair, with every possible precaution, I prepared a plaster which could not be distinguished from the old, and with this I very carefully went over the new brickwork. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. The rubbish on the floor was picked up with minutest care. I looked around triumphantly and said to myself, here at least then my labor has not been in vain. My next step was to look for the beast which had been the cause of so much wretchedness, for I had at length firmly resolved to put it to death. Had I been able to meet with it at that moment, there could have been no doubt of its fate. But it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed at the violence of my previous anger, and forbore to present itself in my present mood. It is impossible to describe or to imagine the blissful sense of relief which the absence of the detested creature occasioned in my bosom. It did not make its appearance during the night, and thus for one night at least, since its introduction into the house, I soundly and tranquilly slept. I slept even with the burden of murder upon my soul. The second and the third day passed, and still my tormentor came not. Once again I breathed as a free man. The monster, in terror, had fled the premises forever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. The guilt of my dark deed disturbed me but little. I don't think he cared much for his wife then. Okay, I already read that. Some few inquiries had been made, but these had been readily answered. Even a search had been instituted, but of course nothing was to be discovered. I looked upon my future felicity as secured. Upon the fourth day of the assassination, a party of the police came very unexpectedly into the house, and proceeded again to make rigorous investigation of the premises. Secure, however, in the inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatever. The officers bade me accompany them in their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored. At length, for the third or fourth time, they descended into the cellar. I quivered not in a muscle. My heart beat calmly as that of one who slumbers in innocence. I walked the cellar from end to end. I folded my arms upon my bosom, and roamed easily to and fro. The police were thoroughly satisfied and prepared to depart. The glee in my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burned to say if but one word by way of triumph, and to render doubly sure their assurance of my guiltlessness. Which, if you've almost gotten away with a crime, you don't say something. But, pride leads to a fall. Gentlemen, I said at last, as the party ascended the steps, I delight to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all health, and a little more courtesy. By the by, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed house. In a rabid desire to say something easily, I scarcely knew what I uttered at all. I may say, an excellently well-constructed house. These walls are you going, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together, And here, through the mere frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily with a cane, which I held in my hand, upon that very portion of the brickwork behind which stood the corpse of the wife of my bosom. But may God shield and deliver me from the fangs of the archfiend. No sooner had the reverberance of my blows sunk into silence than I was answered by a voice from within the tomb. From within the tomb. By a cry, at first muffled and broken, like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelled into one long, loud, and continuous scream, utterly anomalous and inhuman, a howl, a wailing shriek, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony, and of the demons that exult in the damnation. Of my own thoughts it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall. For one instant the party upon the stairs remained motionless, though extremity of terror and of awe. In the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, with red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled the monster up within the tomb. That's the end of the story. Alright, that was a little tiring. But I hope you liked it. Yeah, so here's my real life story to go with that. That was the correct story. But I hadn't actually read it in full until now. So that's why I was a little unsure at the beginning. But anyway, so real life story. I visited Edgar Allan Poe's house. And I took a tour. And I saw the cellar. And apparently that cellar of that house is what inspired that story. And I have to say, it was a little eerie. So, it was really cool visiting Poe's house. It was really cool getting to see an actual location that inspired him. If you can be inspired by your own house, I mean, that's pretty cool. But yeah, it was a little spooky. But it was cool. Like, I'm glad for that experience. Anyways, now I finally read the story that reminded me of that trip. So yeah. I learned a lot about Edgar Allan Poe in that tour. He really loved his wife, I will say. His wife was pretty sickly. So that's kind of sad, but yeah. Anyway, I was gonna do more, but I'm not feeling the best. I might have to cancel tomorrow. We'll see how I feel. But I just wanted to do something special for Halloween. So we just read a story and played through a story. But I had fun. I hope you guys had fun. We can probably raid someone since we were so short. So I'm gonna see who we can raid. That would be nice. Just has to load. I have the hiccups. I'm trying to not make them audible, but yeah. Alright, so something good for Halloween that I can send you guys off to. I don't know this person very well. Let's see. Oh, I could do. You know what? I don't know them very well, but they're another VTuber. They're playing Darkest Dungeon, which I haven't played before, but it looks cool. So we'll go say hi to them, because why not? Alright, let's start this raid. Shall we? Let me do this. Got their name. They're actually playing the sequel. So yeah, Darkest Dungeon 2, actually. Alright, well thanks for hanging out. And I'll see you over there. Let's just switch my thing. Thanks. Thank you, Edie. Alright, just say Z-Raid.